Have you ever experienced a moment that felt slightly wrong, as if reality hesitated for a split second before continuing? Maybe you walked into a familiar place and felt an eerie sense that you'd already lived that exact moment, down to the sound in the room and the way the light hit the walls. Or maybe you keep noticing patterns that don't make sense to anyone else, repeating numbers, perfectly timed coincidences, thoughts that seem to echo back at you through the world. If this has been happening to you, I want you to hear this without fear or exaggeration. You're not imagining it, and you're not alone in noticing it. What you're touching is something science itself has struggled to explain for decades. Research into quantum consciousness and the hidden reality beneath everyday life is revealing that the universe is not as fixed or independent as we were taught. During a spiritual awakening, awareness sharpens, and the mind begins to register signals that were always present but filtered out by habit and distraction. Deja vu, synchronicity, that feeling that reality responds when you pay attention. These aren't glitches, they're clues. In this video, you're going to understand why reality is not locally real, what that actually means in scientific terms, and why consciousness doesn't just exist inside the universe, but actively participates in creating it. This isn't belief or philosophy. It's the quiet edge of physics pointing toward a truth most people never stop long enough to confront. And once you see how observation, awareness, and the quantum field are connected, it becomes impossible to look at your own life the same way again. But before we go any further, there's one unsettling discovery you need to understand, because it explains not only why reality behaves this way, but why your awareness may already be changing in ways you haven't fully noticed yet. If any part of this feels familiar, I want you to mark it quietly. In the comments, write the word noticing, not as a declaration for others, but as a moment of self-recognition. When people see that word repeated, something subtle happens. It confirms that these experiences aren't isolated, and that awareness is already spreading beneath the surface. If this resonates, pressing like isn't approval, it's alignment. It signals that conversations about quantum consciousness and hidden reality deserve space to exist, that curiosity still matters in a world trained to rush past it. Think of it as adding weight to a collective question that hasn't been fully asked yet. And subscribing isn't about commitment or hype. It's simply choosing to stay connected to this line of inquiry as it unfolds. Because what comes next isn't speculation. It's grounded in real experiments that force scientists to admit something deeply uncomfortable about how reality actually works. To understand why this matters to you personally, we have to look at an experiment that quietly unsettled physics without ever becoming dinner table conversation. In 1978, theoretical physicist John Archibald Wheeler, working with Princeton University, proposed what later became known as the delayed choice experiment. His question was simple and deeply uncomfortable. Does a particle decide what it is before we observe it? Or does observation itself help determine what has already happened? When versions of Wheeler's experiment were physically carried out decades later using photons and advanced detectors, the results were clear enough to make scientists uneasy. A single particle of light behaved like a wave when it was not observed, spreading out across multiple possible paths. But when a measuring device was introduced, even after the particle had already passed the critical point, the particle behaved as if it had always been a solid object traveling one definite path. The present act of observation appeared to influence how the particle had behaved in the past. At first, this was framed as a strange quirk of quantum mechanics, something confined to labs and equations. But then the implication became impossible to ignore. If observation collapses possibility into reality at the quantum level, then reality itself is not fully formed until it is observed. The observer effect isn't passive, it's participatory. And this is where it stops being abstract, because your brain, your nervous system, and your sensory awareness are not separate from the quantum field. They are built from it. Every thought you sustain, every emotional pattern you revisit, every assumption you carry about how life works, acts like a form of observation. And that means you are not simply living inside reality, you are helping create which version of it becomes real. If you've ever felt like certain situations in your life repeat no matter how hard you try to escape them, this experiment offers a disturbing explanation. It suggests that attention isn't neutral. Awareness shapes outcome. And when consciousness expands, when perception becomes sharper, the influence of observation becomes harder to ignore. So the unsettling question isn't whether reality responds to observation. The question is, what happens when observation becomes continuous, emotional, and biologically embodied? Because the next discovery doesn't involve particles at all. It involves the human nervous system, and why some people feel these shifts long before they can explain them. And this is where the science stops being distant and starts to feel uncomfortably close to home. In 1983, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet at the University of California, San Francisco, conducted experiments that challenged one of our most basic assumptions, that conscious thought comes first. Libet discovered that measurable brain activity begins hundreds of milliseconds before a person becomes consciously aware of making a decision. Your subconscious mind acts first. Conscious awareness follows. At the time, this shocked the scientific community. It seemed to suggest free will was an illusion, but later interpretations revealed something far more precise and far more unsettling. Consciousness does not initiate every action, but it modulates them. It influences intensity, direction, and outcome. It acts like a field layered over the nervous system, shaping how impulses express themselves. And this explains sensations many people experience during periods of heightened perception, that pressure in your chest, the subtle vibration in your hands, the sudden wave of emotion with no obvious cause. These are not random. They are physiological responses to shifts in frequency. Your brain operates through electrical rhythms. Your heart generates electromagnetic fields. Your subconscious mind constantly scans for coherence between internal state and external reality. And this explains why perception feels different during a spiritual awakening. Time seems distorted, energy feels stronger, emotional reactions arrive before thoughts. Your system is tuning itself, much like an instrument adjusting to a new frequency. Vibration is not poetic language here, it's measurable oscillation. When awareness becomes focused, neural networks synchronize. The body responds before language can catch up. If you're feeling any of this right now, the tightness, the alertness, the sense that something is shifting, it's not coincidence. It's your nervous system recognizing a pattern it has always known, but rarely acknowledged. And when perception changes, reality responds differently. Here's the part most people never hear. As awareness increases, the sense of identity becomes fragile. Old habits loosen. Familiar narratives feel hollow. This is often mistaken for anxiety or instability, when in truth, it's the subconscious mind releasing outdated structures. And before this moves any further, there's something personal you need to understand about why this phase feels so vulnerable, and why pushing against it creates far more resistance than allowing it to unfold. There's a part of this process I didn't expect, and I wish someone had warned me about it before it happened. When my awareness started shifting, when I began noticing how deeply perception shapes experience, I didn't feel powerful. I felt isolated. Conversations that once felt easy suddenly felt shallow. People I loved couldn't meet me where my questions were going. I remember lying awake at night with this heavy sense of doubt, wondering if I was overanalyzing everything, if I was losing touch with something simple everyone else seemed to understand. The hardest moments weren't dramatic. They were quiet, sitting alone after a long day, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest, asking myself whether this awareness was something to trust or something to escape from. There were times I genuinely wished I could go back to not noticing so much. not feeling the subtle shifts in energy, not questioning the invisible forces shaping my reactions, my choices, my life. That in-between space where the old version of you no longer fits, but the new one hasn't stabilized yet, can feel deeply unsettling. And the doubt is real. The loneliness is real. There was a moment that felt like a breaking point. I realized I couldn't unsee what I had already seen, but I also didn't yet know how to live with it. That's when it became clear that this wasn't about becoming special or enlightened. It was about learning how to stay present without numbing myself, how to trust my own perception without needing constant certainty. If any of this feels familiar, let yourself acknowledge it quietly. You don't need to label it or explain it. Just recognizing that you're not alone in this experience can soften something inside. If you feel drawn to stay with this conversation, stay connected. Read the comments. Share your own moment if it feels right. Because what comes next isn't about confusion. It's about learning how to stand inside this awareness with steadiness and discovering that the sensitivity you once questioned may be the very thing that allows you to move forward with clarity. What changes everything is realizing that what you once thought was a flaw was never a defect at all. The sensitivity, the over-awareness, the way your mind refuses to stay on the surface of things, those weren't problems to be fixed. They were signs of perception expanding in a world designed to keep perception narrow. When science began uncovering that consciousness creates, that the quantum observer participates in reality formation, it quietly reframed what a spiritual awakening actually is. Not an escape from life, but a deeper entry into how life truly works. Look at the path we've traced. Physics showed us that reality does not settle into form until it is observed. Neuroscience revealed that your body and subconscious mind respond before conscious thought, tuning themselves to vibration and frequency long before logic steps in. None of this is theoretical when you're living it. It explains why certain environments drain you instantly, why routine feels unbearable, why moments of stillness feel charged instead of empty. Your awareness has been operating beyond survival mode, sensing a hidden reality most people never pause long enough to notice. Here's the reframe that reorganizes everything. What you labeled as anxiety, overstimulation, or being too much is often the nervous system learning to hold more information. A spiritual awakening doesn't add something new, it removes filters. That's why it feels disorienting, but you're not losing stability. You're learning how to perceive without being anesthetized by distraction. If you're watching this right now and feeling that quiet recognition in your body, the loosening in your chest, the steadier breath, the sense of "this explains me," that matters. You're not alone in this awareness. This isn't a random audience. It's a convergence of people experiencing the same reality shift, learning to name it for the first time. And the unsettling truth, the empowering one, is that the influence you've always had over your inner state has been shaping how reality responds to you all along. You were never passive inside the quantum field. You were always part of the equation. But there's one final idea most people aren't ready to face yet. When consciousness reaches a certain level of coherence, observation doesn't just change perception. It begins to alter biological processes in measurable ways. That threshold isn't theoretical. It's already being crossed quietly, individually, without announcement. If this resonated, stay alert to what shifts after this video ends. Because awareness doesn't wait for permission, and once it stabilizes, it changes how you move through everything that comes next. Before you move on, take a moment to mark this internally. In the comments, write, "I'm aware," not to convince anyone, not to perform, but as a quiet signal to yourself and to others who recognize the same shift. When people scroll and see that phrase repeated, it creates something rare, proof that quantum consciousness isn't abstract. It's already being lived by real people noticing the same hidden reality at the same time. If you feel aligned with what you've just experienced, subscribe now, not as a habit, but as an entry point. This isn't a channel built for passive watching. It's a space for consciousness expansion, for those who sense the reality shift and want to understand it without losing their grounding. Staying connected means choosing to walk this path with others who refuse the default narrative about how awareness works. In the next video, we'll go deeper into what's happening inside the body itself. You'll learn 7 strange signs that suggest your DNA may already be responding to a spiritual awakening, and why emerging science says this process isn't optional once it begins. This is where theory becomes personal and where perception turns into practice. Your consciousness brought you here. What happens now is your choice.